Welcome to Love with Francesca, where we dive deep into relationships, self-love, and the empowering journey to authentic connection and healing. We were just chatting behind the scenes. This is the first episode I'm recording for this podcast, which I have little chills right now. So, Nanette, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so
And
much for inviting me.
yeah. So, why don't we get started? Just super easy. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about the work that you do and maybe like what inspired you to do that work.
Sure. So I am a licensed psychotherapist in California, and that's really my bread and butter. But I decided about a year ago that I wanted to add coaching, a coaching practice that's separate to my therapy practice, because I really wanted to work with this particular population that I don't see as meeting really the needs necessarily for therapy because it's more circumstantial and life situations that are challenging that they need support with. And it's a population that I also identify as being a part of. So I work with women who are childless, not by choice. And in all of my training in therapy, I never heard anyone talk about this. I never felt like it was something that was even recognized or just discussed at all. And living that experience, I felt very invisible and alienated. And so when I started looking more into it and realizing this is a thing that some people are talking about, but is really under researched and under discussed. I wanted to create something to support other women going through similar experiences that I had gone through and offer some of my experience and expertise that I have as a professional, but in a setting that wasn't therapeutic per se.
I love that. I should have said also we met through a group coaching program that we did together. So I guess similarly around the time you just said about a year-ish ago, you decided to yeah, so it was around the same time that I was like, I think this is what I'd like to do is start this coaching business and help women. On my end, it was helping women, speak up for themselves and be more authentic and create loving relationships. And wow, does what you're describing to me fall so well into the type of women that I actually do work with sometimes personally. So if you could actually help for me to clarify, and even for our listeners, what do you mean when you say childless, not by choice? If we could just kind of define
Yeah.
that.
So I specify not by choice because some women have made the conscious decision that they don't want to be mothers. And so they often will refer to themselves as child free. But childless is just a word that I use in general because it seems just very clear without child. But childless not by choice, meaning that it wasn't an active choice that you made. But the idea of choice
Mm.
is really tricky because it's not always that simple. It's not either somebody decided not to have children or they couldn't have children. Um,
Yeah.
Plenty of women do fall into that category, and it's a very real pain of infertility.
Yeah.
But more women fall into the category of being childless by circumstance. So it's a combination of life choices and life circumstances that led to the reality of not being a mom. And
Mm.
I fall into that category. And
Mm-hmm.
this can be a really confusing one because we didn't try to have a child and not be able to. So it feels very unrecognized that there are all these choices and circumstances, things we did choose, but did we choose or didn't we choose? So a combination of like for me, I was in a relationship from the time I was 29 until I was 37. And I thought that relationship was going to be the relationship that was forever and we would have children and we didn't. So when it ended at 37, um, I found myself in this demographic that I knew nothing about. Single, childless women over 35. I thought being single would be the same as it always had been when I was in my 20s. And it wasn't, it was very different. And then there's cost of living and education and pursuing your career and other responsibilities or circumstances that made it impossible for me to have a child, or I wasn't, I mean, I did sort of make the choice because I wasn't willing to have a child in those circumstances.
Yeah.
So I wasn't willing to settle for a relationship that wasn't um, as healthy as I wanted it to be. So I made
Yeah.
choices that led to my not having a child, not by choice. So the idea of
Right.
choice is convoluted.
Right. Wow, my brain is just like spinning with questions. This is super interesting. And I'm so happy we can dive deep into this because even when we were in the coaching program, and I remember, this is kind of what you had decided that you wanted to help people with, given your experience with it. I remember being so curious because I work with some women that I think kind of fall into this category in the sense that they either were in the relationships in their early 20s and then the relationship ended, or in their, mid 30s, or they focused on their careers and then they were like, oh shit, I'm 35. Like, what do I do now? And like maybe they hadn't prepared like IVF, or maybe they couldn't afford it, or things like that, or not IVF, sorry, egg freezing. Or they couldn't afford it, or they just didn't think to do it because they were like, whatever, I'll get a boyfriend soon. And then, years would pass, and before you realize it, you're like 37 and single, like you said. Um, yeah, just so many people that fall into that category. And especially nowadays, with what you're talking about, I see so much on social media too, like the fact that, when women now that have the finances to be independent, that don't kind of need to rely, let's say, heterosexual relationships on a man for that, our standards are higher than what they used to be, than what we might have seen our moms or our grandmothers kind of like settle for. And I'll put that in quotations. And so, like you're saying, it's like, okay, I want to have a child, but I'm not willing to settle for an unhealthy relationship just to be able to have a child
Yeah.
and just to be a mom. And maybe I don't want to be a single mom. And so then you kind of find yourself in this situation that probably isn't what you had planned for yourself.
Exactly. And some women, I know people who make the choice to marry whatever guy is there because they want to have a child. And
Yeah.
okay, that's fine too. That wasn't the choice I made. And even with freezing your eggs, I never did that. But it's very expensive.
Yes.
It's cost prohibitive for most people.
Yeah.
I would say most, especially single people. It's also very invasive.
Mm,
That's it's not an easy process to go through physically,
hmm.
and it doesn't have very good outcomes. Like it's not a guarantee, a lot of
Yeah.
times it doesn't work. So you go through
Yeah.
all of that, and then in the end, you still don't have a baby.
Right. My gosh, I can't even imagine because like I'm still only 29, so these are kind of things, and I'm engaged, so hopefully things will work out and
Mhm.
hopefully I will, and I do want to be a mom, and so I'm still in that phase where it's like, okay, hopefully everything will work out. I'll deal with
Yeah,
it later sort of thing, right? But
yeah,
some of the clients that I work with, or even some celebrities that I follow that are, reaching that age. And so there was a podcast that I followed where they actually literally tracked their egg freezing process on the podcast. And what I learned, which is what you're sharing with us now, is that it's not exactly guaranteed, even if you do the egg freezing. And it's super expensive, like you said. So, right, that already, most people probably can't afford that. And most single women, especially, probably can't afford that, depending on what kind of job that you have. Definitely not on a regular therapist salary. We all know that.
mhm.
Um, and so, yeah, then you go through this whole process, which, right, like I think you're like injecting yourself on a daily-ish or weekly
With
basis
hormones,
with
yeah,
hormones, which I already
yeah,
hate needles, so that's not going to happen with
yeah,
hormones. So, the imbalance of the hormones that's happening. And then you go through all that. Now you're 37 or 36. You don't even have the eggs frozen properly. That I know I'm using probably all the wrong terminology, but this shows how little I know about it. But yeah, and that would probably be like extremely disappointing for people to have to deal with.
yeah,
Add on, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but add on the fact that even in 2024, most women are still expected to get married and have a baby, and that is still very intertwined with their worth as a human being, especially if you come from certain cultures, smaller town, maybe a religious background.
yeah,
Talk to us
yeah.
about that aspect.
Yeah, that's called pronatalism. And This is an idea that permeates our society. It's a narrative that's so ingrained in our society, but that we aren't even consciously aware of. And
Hmm.
it's this idea, this understanding that, yeah, parenthood and motherhood in particular is the normative life experience. It's the expected life experience, and it's the path to fulfillment and to worth. And it's also become the primary basis for full social participation. Um, I am married now and I live with my husband. We're currently actually in Champaign, Illinois, which we would never be here by choice, but he's going to law school here. And we were in Chicago before that. And before that, I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. And before that, I was in Los Angeles. So I've been really spoiled with like really great cities. And living in a smaller town, even with the university here, I really feel um, that idea of social participation being something you access through parenthood. Everything is structured
Mm.
for families. It's how, I mean, think about when you're growing up, you make friends at school and then
Yeah.
work, and then people make friends with their kids' parents. And I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
really is rare to find unless you're in a big city, which I was very spoiled with all of the amazing things that are offered. Like there's not that
Right.
much to do or ways to get involved if you don't have kids.
Yeah. Yeah. I moved to Toronto 2 years ago and I was like, how do you make friends as an adult?
Yeah.
And fortunately, at my age, people are still looking to make friends as an adult. But I would imagine that when you get older, most people, first of all, you have way less time once you have kids, once you have a family. So you're obviously trying to like merge the time that you can socialize with like the fact that you have your kids there. So like you're not going to be getting like drinks with the girls with like maybe you will, but probably not
Not
all
as
the
often,
time,
not as
not as
often. And when
often.
you do, all you're going to be talking about is
Is the babies.
is the babies and what it's like. So if
Yeah.
you're like out with your friends who all have
Yeah.
kids and you don't, it can be
Right.
pretty alienating.
Right. This makes a lot of sense. One of the clients that I've worked with that has been single for quite some time. I remember she was really struggling. She comes from a small town, and so not only what you're describing, but then she would go back home and it was like, do you have a boyfriend yet? Are you gonna have children yet? Like, and all those questions. And the thing is that, and I'd love to get in a little bit deeper into this with you, is like then at an emotional level, like subliminally, those messages are just
Mhm.
constantly telling you, like, no matter the great career that you have, because she was having a great career, like she
Yeah.
works in an amazing company, like doing super cool things. No matter the amazing career that you've built for yourself, no matter the amazing hobbies and experiences you're having in your life, the only freaking question that you're getting is
Yeah.
the pronatalism. Is that how you defined it?
Yeah.
The motherhood questions of like
Yeah.
great, this is all cool. When are you going to be a mom? When are you going to
Yeah.
have kids?
Do you have kids? Why not?
Yeah.
Oh, have you ever considered adoption? It's like
Right.
it's everybody has the same script, and it's
Right.
crazy making because yeah, that's what you get. And even if you don't get that, like I was saying before, the
Hmm.
topic of conversation is all around people's families and their kids. And so you're
Right.
sitting there like, my life is actually really interesting. Why is nobody asking me about it? It's like because
Yeah.
people don't know what to do with you because you don't fit into this box that they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yes.
wow, I have like multiple advanced degrees. I started my own business. I'm a salsa dancer. I speak languages. Like, nobody's asking me.
Right. Right. Oh, I love that you're a salsa dancer. I would not have known that about you if you hadn't shared that. See, but that's so cool. That's so interesting. So, yeah. And so subliminally, it's almost like the messages that we just keep receiving if we're in that circumstance is that we're not good enough, or we're not
Yeah.
valuable enough, or
And
not
you
worthy
failed.
enough. And you failed.
And
That's
you weren't
intense.
chosen, especially if you're single. It's like this feeling of, oh, there must be something wrong with me because I wasn't chosen, I wasn't failed, and I'm behind. This is this
Right.
idea that
Right.
I hear even from my really young clients a lot of like there being this timeline that it's like we're all born and we're handed this like ruler and it's got like these milestones on it. We have to
Yeah.
measure ourselves against it to see if we're succeeding, if we've met
Yeah.
the markers and the
Yeah.
appropriate time of what we're supposed to do. And it's so harmful
Hmm.
each of us has our own unique path. I say to clients, it's like you think you're on a racetrack and you can look across at the other person and see if they're ahead of you or behind you, but we're not on a racetrack because each path is so unique that it's an
Right,
illusion whether someone's ahead or behind.
right,
We
right.
just don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, that belief is really harmful. So then you feel, it affects your self-esteem and um, it increases anxiety, it increases alienation. It's really painful, and
Yeah,
nobody's talking about it, so you don't really know why, and nobody's talked about the
right.
experience of what it's like to be single, especially. I mean, my interest really is on the intersectionality, especially of single women, but I am now married. I met my husband when I was 44. Um, so I don't specifically say it that way because I don't want to be like the married woman who's talking about being single, but I
Yeah,
was single from the time I was 37 until I was 44, and particularly that at that age, it's such a different experience from being
right.
single in your 20s, which is what I
Yeah.
experienced before.
Right, I can imagine. And you already kind of started to allude to the mental health effects that this can have. And thinking about this is where I love the coaching world. You can say what you want about it. Obviously, I have a bunch of critiques, yes, whatever. But this is where it's super useful, is because I would imagine that a lot of women that are in this circumstance fall through the cracks of your typical mental health world because they
Yeah.
probably don't have like a full-blown mental illness, which is
Yeah.
what you need to have to qualify for insurance, to get support and to get help and everything. And so, they probably get diagnosed with like adjustment disorder or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, they
Um,
might have legitimately have, anxiety disorders or
sure.
depression, but
Mm,
even that, I hate to over pathologize that because those are
yeah,
pretty normal reactions to these circumstances.
exactly. Exactly. Like it's not like you have like a chemical imbalance, or it's not like you have like major depressive disorder coming from something else. It's like clearly
It's
you're living through a
grief.
circumstance.
It's
Yeah,
grief.
it's grief. And you're living through a circumstance that is really challenging. You're getting constant messages that you're not good enough and you
Mhm.
failed and you're not chosen. Sorry, but who wouldn't develop depression or
Yeah.
anxiety if that's their day-to-day life? And,
Yeah.
then you're receiving this was just a little side tangent, but this was a culture shock for me when I moved to the US. I grew up in Italy. And then you receive the holiday gift cards with everyone's like picture perfect, family
Yep.
picture. And it's like I imagine you receive that picture and you're just like, like it, it can't
I
feel good.
know. Like every year I would have fantasies of like sending one out with like me and like a bottle of wine or like but
Right,
but the
right.
reality is if I sent pictures of what I was doing, it would have been pretty interesting. And a lot of times
Yeah,
more interesting than, PTA and cabinets, but
sure,
not according
sure.
to, which I'm interested in talking about those things to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Um, it's just that can't be all there is.
No, no, I love that. So talk to us maybe about like how does one how do you get support around this? What does it look like to get support around this? I hate to use the word recovery because I feel like that's not really what it is, but like,
Healing.
you know, yeah, healing. What does that look
Yeah.
like for people in this circumstance?
Well, there are communities out there. We have a presence in social media, and so there are a lot of people out there globally. There are coaches. There are even some therapists who
Mm.
specialize in this. I
Wow.
am one of them. And you can find all of these things online. So community, I think, is really important in
Yeah,
recognizing, oh, I'm not alone in this, and I'm not, this isn't abnormal. This is also a
right,
normative life experience. It's just
right.
another human experience. It's just one that's not um, celebrated in our culture. Unfortunately, it's not celebrated because think about it. All of
Mhm.
the inner resources that a woman has, especially a woman who feels that strong, like maternal instinct, that's an
Yeah,
untapped resource. When it's
yeah,
not being used up all on raising her own children, that's available to put wherever she
yeah,
chooses. And so
yeah.
this is an incredible community of women who have a lot to offer. Um,
Mm.
if they recognize that within themselves. So yeah, finding some community I think is important. Um,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing and understanding that what you are experiencing often is grief. It's a disenfranchised grief. Um,
Mm,
it's sometimes what we call an ambiguous loss, which is a loss of, well, there's two different versions of it. It can be like someone who's physically there but emotionally gone, like with dementia, um,
sure.
or
Yeah.
somebody who is emotionally or psychologically there but physically gone. Um, could be like a child who was kidnapped or somebody who's off at war,
Mm,
or it could be a woman with this child that she never had.
mhm. Right.
Because ask any woman who wanted to be a mother and didn't realize that dream, that child is very psychologically and emotionally present in her life,
Mm,
but physically absent. So it's an ambiguous loss. And so recognizing and honoring that and learning how to grieve and honor your experience is so, so
right.
important. I think that's
Right.
really the first step, and developing
Yeah.
the skills to do that with self-compassion and self-acceptance.
Mhm.
That's really where I start when I'm working with women, is understanding all of that. And then we
Yeah.
develop more like uh, more tools that I like to think of it as sort of the yin and the yang. Um,
Yeah.
the inward ones, the softer ones, and then the outward ones, which are like really like learning how to develop dialectical thinking skills. So you can have this both and thinking of, yeah, it's both true that I did really want this, and this is not something that realized, and I still have a potential to have a fulfilling life, and it doesn't have to always be second best.
Right.
Like two things that are seemingly contradictory can be true at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yeah.
To really work with a lot of the skills that you and I, you know, learn as therapists with,
Mhm.
thought skills and um, interpersonal effectiveness skills, communication tools, setting
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah.
All of those kinds of tools are really, at
Yeah.
least the way I work with my clients, are built in. Um, really looking at this component of the role of society and understanding what pronatalism is, and understanding the role
Mhm.
of, the patriarchy, and
Yeah.
dismantling those things and
Right.
recognizing we write our own narrative,
Right.
which is
That's
really
so
important.
beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't realize like everything that you just described is so ingrained in us. We don't even realize the level at which that conditioning has infiltrated our whole belief and thought process system. So even when you were talking about self-compassion, I imagine a lot of women come in like even blaming themselves for the fact that they weren't able to have a kid, or having so much shame around the fact that they weren't able to have a child, that they weren't chosen by someone to have a child with.
Yeah.
And that must be very difficult for people to initially like really come face to face
Yeah.
with, of those
Yeah.
emotions. So it's really beautiful what you're saying, not only getting professional support if that is what you're needing, but also just in general finding other people, that other women that are in that circumstance and
Yeah.
situation, to just know like you're not alone, sweetie. There's so many women that are in this situation and can maybe even help guide you to create a full life,
Yeah.
and grieve, the fact that you weren't able to have the life that you wanted to have or thought you wanted to have.
Yeah. It's so true. And the idea of rewriting our narrative there, even just like what I was saying, and then what you also said with, oh, I
Yeah.
wasn't chosen by someone to have a child with, to also recognize that, no, I didn't choose.
Mm,
Not that I
mhm.
wasn't chosen, I didn't choose, because any
Yeah.
woman who wants to can go out and get pregnant. I mean, if
Yeah.
she's physically able to
Sure. Yeah.
get pregnant,
Yeah.
like, I didn't find someone worthy of, connecting my life to
Gosh.
and having babies with. I didn't choose. It's so easy to feel that you are unchosen.
Mhm. And what a difference it is to, even in dating, a lot of, clients or friends that I talk to that are single, and they talk about dating, and um my personal opinion with dating and my perspective for women is like, go out there, like go ask someone on a date, like don't just sit passively waiting for, just don't wait passively to be chosen, right? It's a whole concept of don't wait around to be chosen, because it's like every time that you're not, it feels like such a huge rejection. And
Mhm.
so that shift of going from, okay, it's not that I wasn't chosen, is that I didn't choose. Like you feel so much more of an active participant in your own life and in designing it how you want it to be. And just the ownership of like, no, wait, it's not that I didn't choose because I'm not good enough. It's like I didn't choose because I didn't find someone that met
Yeah.
me where I needed to,
Hmm.
my standards or my needs or whatever it was that you
Yeah.
didn't, for why you didn't choose somebody.
Yeah. And so you can still have grief around that, but it has like a little more sense of agency. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I often think, well, I loved my children so much, my potential children so much that I
Mhm.
wasn't willing to bring them into the world in a way that I felt I couldn't be the kind of parent that they deserved.
Mm. Mhm. That's beautiful. What are some of the, like, if you have any like tangible practices that you encourage the women that you work with to do to be able to grieve
Mm.
those children that they had imagined for themselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, turning inward and developing this ability to pay attention to what we're actually experiencing, what we're feeling in our body is a skill that sounds really obvious, but is not. And takes a lot of practice so that we can really
Yeah.
honor what we're feeling because there's an instinct to suppress, deny, avoid, numb out the feeling, but to be with that feeling and be with it in a new way with compassion.
Hmm.
That practice is really important. Um,
Yeah.
what was the original question? What are the practices?
Just like practices, yeah. Like, what do you typically encourage women to be able to do?
Yeah. Then also, starting to notice the small moments of anything that stops you and with joy or pleasure.
Mm.
So those little moments, even if it's like, oh, that's a pretty color. Or like, "Ooh, that sip of coffee was yummy," to pause and to take those in, which starts to train the brain to pay attention to those moments because our brains are really wired to pay attention to the things that we don't like or that are harmful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then little by little expanding on that to discover things that bring you joy beyond this idea of what you thought was going to bring you joy.
Right.
Um,
Wow,
you
this
know
really does sound like a lot of grief work. The way that I hadn't thought about it that way originally, but the way that you're describing it, it's so much grief work of being able to, first of all, accept what's happened, but then even more than that, like really embrace what your life is and make it
Yeah,
as good as you can make it.
that's exactly what it is. It's the process of grieving
Yeah,
shifting your belief system around that, which that's really
right,
hard. People
right.
really hang on to those belief systems that they don't even realize are beliefs. They just feel like objective truths.
Mm, mhm.
And that's really tricky. But
Yeah,
to hold those just a little bit less tightly and be open to what else may be. You were saying, "Oh, so cool, you're a salsa dancer." I probably wouldn't be if I had children.
right, right.
There's a lot of cool things I do and have done
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
wouldn't if I had children. And
yeah.
would I have chosen to have children instead of that? Probably, yes, that's
Sure,
what I
yeah,
would say. But
yeah,
also, not having children gives me a lot of advantages. And you can appreciate that and be sad that you didn't have them.
right, right.
That's what I
Talk
mean
to
by
us.
the dialectical thinking.
Talk to us about some of the advantages. And before you do, sorry, I just want to include throughout this whole conversation, I've been thinking a lot about Chelsea Handler. I started listening to her recently, her podcast. I find her hilarious.
Yeah.
And she didn't have children by choice, so obviously a
Yeah.
different circumstance, but the way in which she talks about it is just so funny because she's like,
Yeah.
I get to like, well, this is my podcast, so I can curse all I want, but it's like, I get to fuck off and go skiing and like
Yeah.
not deal with like anything. And
Yeah.
I can just have fun and I can do what I want and I have so much freedom. So talk to us about like what are some of the advantages that you have been able to find and cultivate, or even women that you've worked with?
Yeah, for sure. There are many. Well, probably my number one favorite one that's just like on a day-to-day basis is I have really slow, quiet mornings.
Oh, wow. For
And
any parent out there that they're like so
I
jealous hearing you say
it's
that.
so good. I take like an hour to drink my coffee, leisurely, like, and I do a crossword puzzle every single morning, and I sit and like savor my breakfast and like look at my birds out my window, and it's like so beautiful and glorious. I love it.
Yeah,
That's not even
beautiful.
like, oh, I'm traveling all the time. It's like
Sure.
a peaceful morning, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
Would I give it up? Yeah,
Hmm.
but I love it. Also, eventually after my husband is done with law school, we'll have a dual income and, we'll be dinks doing
Mm-hmm.
kids. And
Mm-hmm.
that will allow us to have more freedom in things we choose to do. Um, it has also given me time to pursue hobbies and interests that bring me a lot of pleasure, like dancing.
Yeah.
I really love it, and I've made so many friends doing it, and it just brings me so much happiness. And yeah, it's great. I can travel a lot more easily, even if
Mhm.
it's not super like fancy travel, because
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about the additional tickets for the kids or finding childcare. I have to find dog
Mhm.
care, but that's easy
These
enough.
freaking dogs nowadays are so much more expensive than they used to be.
I know. Especially my dog because he gets all of the attention that I would put on my
Of
children.
course. Yeah.
Um, yeah, what else? My house is clean, like almost
Yeah.
always.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and honestly, I mean, this may be so frivolous, I think is the right word to say, but like I was on the phone with a client this morning that has, I think, a 1.5-year-old. And I'm like, y'all are superheroes because I already have to take care of myself all day. I can't imagine taking care of another human. You don't
Yeah.
have sleepless nights where you're
No.
like, oh shit,
Oh,
my kid's
I get so much
sick.
sleep.
You get so much sleep. Like,
Yeah. My sister, she's got 3 children, and for the first, I don't know, however many years, anytime I would call her, all I could hear in the background was like screaming. I'd be like, I can't hear what you're saying because I can't. She's like, I don't even hear it anymore. I'm like, okay, I gotta go. Or like the other night, we went over to a friend's house to watch the results of the election come in, and
Yeah.
I think we were the only ones who didn't have kids, so there were like all these kids running around and screaming, and like they were having so much fun, and they were so cute, but like it was so chaotic. And when my husband
Yeah.
and I were like, let's go home, we got home and we were like, oh, isn't this peaceful?
It sounds like you've really been able, it's really beautiful to hear you talk about these things that I guess like the journey that you went through to get to where you are right now, because you sound so happy and grateful with the ways in which you've been able to fill your life
Yeah,
that are so different than how you wanted to or thought you would be able to. But, I think of even that peaceful morning, right? Like, and what you're saying about like the mindset shift is so true because that peaceful morning, you could think about it as like a very empty morning, a very
mm,
sad, empty morning. Or you can choose to think about it as, wow, look how beautiful. I have the time to look at the birds chirping outside of the
yeah,
window. And it
yeah,
really is a mindset shift. I mean, it's also, you have to process all the feelings and emotions,
yeah.
but then it's really just about how do I perceive this situation in a way that allows me to feel good about myself and my life.
Totally, totally. And I think that underlying that is that I really enjoy my own company and I have a good
Mm,
relationship with myself. That had to happen first in order for that morning to be peaceful because a
yeah,
lot of people are trying a peaceful morning sounds terrifying to them because they need all the busyness to keep them distracted from being with
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And I love being with my feelings.
That's so beautiful. I'm listening. I'm like, this is so inspiring. But like to anyone, right? Like not just women that are childless by choice. Excuse me, not by choice. But even just in general, like what you said is so true for so many people, whether you have children or not, whether you're single or not. Like, I think a lot of what you said is going to resonate with so many people just because these are normal human things that we go through. Like being able to create a beautiful relationship with yourself, being able to create hobbies for yourself, passions, things that you're interested in, like that really makes or breaks your day if you're able to
Uh,
enjoy your time with yourself or not.
It's so huge. It's so
Yeah,
huge. Like there's no one else in the world we're ever going to spend as much time with or have as many meals with or have as many conversations
right,
with as ourselves.
right. Yeah. And one last thing I was curious about, and I'll bring it back to Chelsea Handler as well, is similar to what you were saying earlier about women, that aren't mothers, but they have so much like mothering, nurturing, caring, beautiful energy to be able to share with the world, is that I've heard her talk about like, I have all this nurturing energy. I don't have children. Guess what? I get to share that with so many other people in my
Yeah.
life. I get to mother and nurture so many other people in my life. So I'm curious, like with the women that you work with, and tell me if this is kind of a correct way of expressing it, but is there something that is there a point in which you learn how to channel all that energy into yourself or other people in your life so that obviously it's never going to replace the fact that you didn't have a child. That's not going to happen, but you can at least kind of like express that part of you that clearly wants to be expressed.
Yeah. Well, it's a practice. I mean, I say that to
Mm.
all of my clients, no matter what we're talking about, that all of these things we talk about are practices. You can understand the concept, but that would be like somebody showing me how to play the chords on a guitar. Like
Yeah,
I would not then be Jimi Hendrix. I would have to practice and
sure.
practice and practice and practice. And you have to practice all of these things. So I think that is something that needs to be practiced as well to,
Hmm.
but it all starts from awareness. So we have to, number one, start paying attention to what's happening internally and developing, cultivating that self awareness and self compassion, knowing what we're feeling, knowing how to respond to ourselves. That's actually the first one. You take that maternal energy, you put it on yourself.
Mm.
You know, it's inner child work. We do a lot of inner
Yeah,
child work in my program.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and recognize I do actually have a child. It's my own inner child, and she needs me. Um, and then we can be intentional with that and practice doing it. And you know, I for me and for a lot of women who are lucky enough to have nieces and nephews, that's a great place
Hmm.
to start.
Yeah.
But I feel it with my clients too, like especially my like teenage clients and the ones that I've watched sort of grow up throughout the years. Like
Yeah.
what a what a beautiful thing that I get to do, to have this role in there in raising them in a sense,
Hmm. Yeah.
where I'm not their parent, but I'm an adult and I'm a mentor and I'm a support that's really impactful in their experience of growing up. And not
Yeah.
that I wouldn't do that if I had children of my own, but there may be a little more of my energy that goes into them because I don't. Um, but yeah, anything in the world around us, with our animals, with our plants, with our
Mm.
planet really needs that energy
Hmm. Hmm.
desperately.
Yeah.
Um, wherever you choose to put it, you know, it's like I said, it's an untapped resource. And if we can start to think
Yeah.
of it that way and then practice
Right.
actively asking yourself, how can I think in this way and how can I behave in this way? Because sometimes the action has to come
Right.
before the belief or the feeling.
For sure, for sure. Sometimes we process our feelings first and then we're able to do it. Sometimes we have to do it to then be able to feel like it makes sense for us.
Mhm.
But I love it. It just sounds a lot like expanding kind of the definitions of motherhood, that it doesn't just have to be like one single thing. You can be a motherly figure in so many different ways for so many
Yeah.
different people. And I love that you starting with yourself. And I think that's a piece of advice that, I mean, I give to every single person
Mhm.
that I know is like,
Yeah.
start with you, and then you can go figure out how to help and support everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Is there any last advice, words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I said a lot.
You did. I definitely learned a lot today. Thank you so much for your time.
For having
And
me.
yeah, and thank you also for sharing with us, yourself, what you've been through, right? I think it's easy to present the therapist version of ourselves and the
Mhm.
expert version of ourselves, and it can be a bit harder to really be like, no, this is actually something that I've been through, and this is something that I've now chosen to dedicate myself to helping other people because I have my own personal experience with it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So where can people find you? I know you also have a Facebook community in case women want to meet other women in this situation.
Yes, I do. So, people can find me in several places. I have two different websites. One is for my therapy practice, one is for my coaching practice. And if you're not sure if you are more um, needing therapy or coaching, I can help you figure that out. Therapywithnanette.com is my therapy website, and coaching with Nanette is my coaching website. You can find me on Instagram at Childless Grace. Um, or on Facebook, I'm Nanette Riendeau, Riendeau, and Nanette is with just one N. And I do have a free Facebook community in there that's called Pivot to Possibility, where I use it
Beautiful.
mostly as a way to collect free resources that I'm offering to the community. So,
Mhm.
you know, I do little talks or write little things and have them in there so people can access it there, but they can also connect with one another in that space if they so choose.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And everything that you just shared is also going to be in the show notes so people can find you there easily. Thank you so much for your time. Anyone that is going through the situation or knows someone that's kind of going through this, please feel free to reach out to Nanette or just find a community that you think would be helpful to you.
Yeah.
With that being said, if you found this episode interesting, if you think it would be helpful to anyone, please feel free to like, subscribe, do all the things. I haven't memorized them yet. Hopefully soon I will. But, feel free to follow the podcast and support the podcast and send it to anyone that you think would be helpful. Thank you so much.